Catch some music myself tonight. Don't have a whole lot of help this evening. On the coffee, nice. Welcome back to the Cognitive Rampage. I know those of you, I got enough emails reminding me that I didn't have a show last week. I apologize for that. What we're doing is we're kind of in a transition. As you can see, some of the setting has changed a little bit. But we're in a transition of remodeling the office and the studio area. We're actually going to be starting this show on a podcast. Probably by September 26th, we should be on podcast on the Apple iPhone. If you download the podcast app on Apple, you'll be able to search the Cognitive Rampage, as well as a new show that Leo is going to start on Truth Not Emotion. Hey Leo, speak of the devil, and he shall appear.
Yeah, what's up?
What's up, baby?
All right.
So he's going to start his show also, Truth Not Emotion, social sessions. He's going to be doing, well, I'll let him tell you about that in a minute. But essentially, we're going to be on podcast. His show will be available on podcast as well. You'll be able to search it. Like I said, again, you can download the iPod or the podcast app on the Apple iPhone. And you'll be able to listen to the podcast. We'll still have the Ustream channel too. Leo won't have the Ustream because his shows will be live in a bar, so he can't have that on film, but he'll tell you more later. But anyway, the Cognitive Rampage will still be on camera. Again, I know I said last show, well not last week, but the week prior, that I'd be speaking around South Florida, Naples area to begin with. But in about 6 weeks, I'm going to set a date with you, or I'm going to set a date in the next week or so. That's about 6 weeks out of when I'm going to do the first Cognitive Rampage live, where I'll be giving a seminar, which is free for anybody in the area to come listen to me talk about kind of my approach to life and some philosophies I've discussed on the show. But that's coming, so apologize again for last week, but we're trying to keep the content coming and keep building some shows for you, so I apologize. I tried to answer all the emails. If I didn't get to you, I apologize. I keep drinking coffee to keep me there. But excited to be back, though, and talk. Frankly, after you do a show for a while, whether the audience is there now watching live or they tend to watch later, or listen later, I should say, you start to miss them. You know, and 1 week went by, you know, Leo, and we didn't do a show, and I'll tell you, I felt guilty. You know, I felt like I couldn't get there.
Yeah, I got a lot of what's up. You know, what happened?
Yeah, we're just showing. You know, what happened 1 week. You know, and I felt bad. I was like, I'm sorry.
Well, I sort of felt good. They actually noticed that I didn't do it. So,
That's true. That's true.
So it's good to be missed. But yeah, we were talking before about something that was pretty interesting that I want to share with people.
Yeah.
We're talking about the idea that we spend so much energy really trying to make sense of irrational thinking, you know, to justify our moods if they're negative, if they're
you correlated it to a personality outside when we were talking.
Yeah,
I was trying to follow you, and I didn't. How did you connect that to the personality? You know, using energy. You said something about using energy for something to put it somewhere else. If we could use that somewhere else.
I mean, a lot of times we're trying to make sense of why I feel so down.
Okay.
And so we start looking at all the reasons out there in the environment that justify the choices that we made, and how we rectify it, and how we qualify it, and but instead of taking the energy to understand an emotion, you know, why not spend that same energy to define the truth about yourself? Because again, all those emotions, if they don't feel right, if it feels sad or down or painful, or, it doesn't belong there, you know? So
yeah, it's festering, right?
Yeah, so you
so
know
I love that when you can, sorry, I'm sorry to cut you, but I love it when, you know, people in the mental health field can correlate something to a physical or a medical field, because I think people understand that. You know, so when you talk about it doesn't belong there, you know, I think about, you use a splinter metaphor a lot. But, you know, when you talk about, you know, there's a wound or the pain, and it's healing itself, but it's flexing the pain because it doesn't belong there. If you have something in you, you know, and we get that medically, you know, and biologically with our bodies.
Yeah,
you know?
our body's trying to tell us something.
Right.
You know, like I got a fever, or I got a stomach ache, or I got this sharp pain in my neck.
And we're quick to listen to that.
We pick up and know immediately.
So why do people tend to ignore that mental pain? I guess, look, I mean, we don't ignore when our body has the physical pain or it's rejecting something, and we know it is. We're quick to move on that. I mean, we'll call the doctor, we'll get some prescriptions, we'll do whatever we got to do. Shit, people show up to the emergency room. So why mentally, when people realize that something's there that shouldn't be, whether it's sadness, anxiety, frustration, anger, irritability, guilt, doubt, I mean, when that's there, why are people so apprehensive to go, let me get on top of this? What is that?
Well, we try to understand a mood and to justify the mood instead of trying to resolve it and remove that way of feeling. If there's something medically wrong, we want it resolved. We want a solution for it. If there's something emotionally wrong, we're trying to understand it and justify it.
Why? What's the separation?
Same way, if we have a positive mood, we don't try to justify it. Okay, so we just accept that whatever I'm feeling is a result of what's happening around me. But we don't stop to think about when I'm feeling something I don't want to feel internally, there's something that's not compatible with me, with the core
of who I am.
Yeah, so instead of stopping for a moment, I say the pause.
The pause, right.
And saying, whoa, why am I thinking this? Why do I have to think this? In fact, what do I need to do to prevent from thinking this? And so...
Right, we don't. We just kind of react to the emotion. When it's a physical pain, we do react to it by like, ouch, or it's aching. But then we take the steps to resolve it.
Well, we respond by going to see a physician, or to get it examined, or to get an x-ray or something.
Right.
I mean, we do something.
But when it's mental, people lack the ability to do something.
Well, not lack it, they just don't understand that they are able to.
Oh, so you're saying a lack of understanding that
awareness.
Maybe that they need to.
Right.
Or, I mean, because look, we correlate mental illness or depression or something. I think I've had conversations with, new people that, where they'll correlate depression automatically with someone who's suffering from schizophrenia or something. They awfulize that idea.
Right. Well, again, they're trying to have some sort of accounting for it. They're trying to, in some ways, to justify the emotion as opposed to challenging the emotion and invalidating it.
And that would speak to what I would say, that people always want to be right, even if they're willing, even if they have to suffer. So people will make themselves suffer mentally, even physically, to force themselves to know that they're right. And so that concept, when you say that, something happens to them, right? The activating event, as Ellis or other cognitive people may say, the activating event happens, and I can either perceive that as being painful, or perceive that as not being painful, or normal, or abnormal.
Right. Again, that's why they tend to reconcile whatever it is they're feeling based on choices they've made, or they're looking for the source of the symptom. And instead of understanding the symptom isn't a part of their actual makeup, it's a part of a historical thing, or something based on a biochemical imbalance, like their serotonin levels or whatever. But whatever it is, the body's saying, I'm not at baseline. But the mind's trying to reconcile it that this makes sense based on a baseline. And it doesn't correlate. So that's the whole thing about when you say I'm depressed. I talk about the idea that you're never depressed, you're being affected by depression.
You're being affected by depression.
I mean, you're no more, you're not depressed anymore than your headache.
I love that.
But automatically when I got a headache, I got to do. And how our brain's wired.
Go get the Advil, or Aleve, or Tylenol, or whatever. I'm trying to get every name brand, because I know some people that listen are like, oh no, this works.
But what's cool is to know, though, how our brain is wired, at least this is my understanding, that what we do affects how we feel more than how we feel affects what we do. So if it's a physical thing, we do something to resolve it. Okay.
So then again, what we do is making us feel better. So thus what we do affects how we feel.
Right. So we don't try to think it better. we do something to make it better.
But I think the thought is just as important. The thought has to happen to create the action.
Absolutely. So
and if that thought is irrational, then the behavior is going to be irrational. Thus, the feeling is irrational.
And that's the point then. So if I know I'm feeling something that's not a rational understanding of who I am, I do something to resolve this emotion, this feeling. If I try to think it away, it doesn't work. I have to do something to make it go away.
Once I correct the thought, in my opinion, you got to correct the thought to make the behavior be corrected.
Right. So if you know that it doesn't belong there, you've changed your thought from trying to understand it to change it.
So what you're saying is by just the idea of taking the action to create the behavior, you've already created the thought.
You're already, completely reshuffling the deck.
Already. So once you've decided to take action, you're saying the thought is already seated.
Well, you're already knowing that I have to do something to eliminate something that doesn't belong here.
Gotcha.
As opposed to justifying it, reconciling it, understanding it.
Sure.
Those are all thoughts, but they're all consistent with a negative belief or a perception that's not based on a reality.
Oh,
so
I would agree.
There we go.
Now, back to what I was saying is still why isn't, I'm going to keep exploring it because I see that, and I think I heard you mumble it was the awareness, and this concept or this notion, right? Because and I'll come from a young boy perspective, right? The young boy raised perspective and the generalization.
The Yoda.
And the generalization is told that, look, boys can take falls, can take scrapes, bumps, bruises, and you're not supposed to cry, you're not supposed to feel. So again, a physical activating event happens that creates a hurt. Thus, a natural response is suppressed, right? And so even physically, we're taught to even ignore the idea of doing something about the pain, whatever that pain may be, or sickness, or illness, or diagnosis, or whatever.
Yeah.
That even, can that itself seed the notion that if I have something wrong mentally, or I feel a depression or a wound mentally that I know shouldn't be there, like the bump or bruise, that based on what I've been taught about my physical injuries, I'm supposed to, and there's my irrational determinant word, supposed to, I'm supposed to not react to it as I feel to naturally, which is to ask for help and do something about it.
Yeah.
But more or less suppress the natural response and do something ego-driven.
Yep. Our culture tells us, and societies, you have to endure pain.
Right, we have to endure.
And that's something that's actually thought of as a very noble.
It's honorable.
Honorable.
But in some cases, that's true, enduring.
Yeah, if not, you're being a sissy or something.
Right, so where do you draw the line between I'm enduring what I'm suffering and going, I need fucking help?
Well, when it's more important for you to resolve than to get accepted, then that's when change takes place.
Bam.
Okay, but like you were saying, discomfort is where the change is.
Uncomfortable is where the change is,
So
baby.
in other words, so that when I'm feeling that discomfort, be it emotional or physical, then I got to make a choice. Either to learn how to endure it, learn how to
cope with
accommodate it, where it's gone from unbearable to bearable to normalize it. Well, yeah, it always hurts like hell. Okay.
Yeah.
Or I could go the other route and say, this is something I don't want, and take that pain and let it motivate me towards change.
And that's where we always go to about using, I talk down about anger a lot. But that's where, we talk to the clients, I know you do, and about utilizing that anger in a good perspective.
Yeah, sort of
and I'll tell you,
Yeah.
grasping that for me for a while was hard to grasp. Because, angry is, I keep Leoism in, but anger to me was Fred the old friend. And so I did my best to avoid, the anger, that was there. So when we began to talk about utilizing anger in a positive implication, it was hard for me to really start to put together. Because even, I'm a football background guy. So even utilizing the anger then was put force to brute force. And even intellectual issues, but sure, it was good because you may have won the game, but in the essence, the anger was not being used properly. Or used for good per se, but that speaks to that. And I've had two clients in the last 2 days look at me with a fury in their eye about sustaining their sobriety. you know, and I see that fury, you know, and I can picture it, you know, that
Right.
anger that they feel, and I preach to them to utilize that, channel that, you know, and use that.
Absolutely.
It is powerful on both ends.
I mean, it's and that goes back to, you know, taking control as opposed to letting an emotion control you. So I'm taking.
I mean, how do you take control of the anger?
Well, you embrace it, you understand it.
Now, does embracing it mean soaking up the rush of emotion to react violently, verbally, physically?
No, it's more about redirecting it.
Okay.
So I mean, right now it's just going in all directions.
Right.
But if I take the time, if I pause and understand it, then, in other words, then I'm telling myself I'll be damned if I'm going to do this anymore.
Right. So turning that to I'm not going to do this anymore. I'll be damned if I do this anymore.
And it propels you into a positive direction.
Yeah. Right.
So
now, can that eventually end in a crash and burn? I mean, all that adrenaline rush of that anger to push through. It's kind of like, look, am I setting out on a marathon or a sprint here?
Well, again, if you're already in that discomfort, you know, difficulty is where the changes.
Uncomfortable are the changes.
Exactly.
You need that push.
You need to break through that wall.
Yeah, you're right. I agree. That's the pendulum I talk about.
And once you get on the other side of that wall, then the future's pulling you forward. The past is no longer dragging you back.
Oh, in the future, you know, and it's funny you mentioned that. You know, I had a podcast I listened to the other night. It was on the Tim Ferriss show. Beal is the guy's name, last name, inventor of PayPal, etc. He had a 20-minute podcast interview style. It changed my life, Leo. It changed my life. That 20 minutes. But now, then I meditated for an hour after that. I mean, still meditation, but I played chess mentally. Instead of trying to calm the thoughts, I allowed the thoughts to take place, and I played chess, essentially. And it changed my life, man. You know, and taking that moment of calmness, you know, approaching something, and that's what kind of led me to that idea when you talked about the future. And, you know, I've talked about, and we talk about even, you know, that being in the here and now. And being in the here and now makes us ignore the future, because the future can cause anxiety and thoughts of it. But with this, what Mr. Beal was talking about, was that the notion of the future should be embraced, because it's that pull, it's that driving pull. And the other notion he talked about was this notion of fear and failure. And he noted that he believed failure to be overrated. And he said that, you know, and I've been one to talk about how fear or failure is a good thing to a point. And he talks about every failure is a tragedy. And that it's not this romantic notion that you've learned something from it, etc., but it's a tragedy. And if we don't examine carefully why we failed, many people say, you know, can say, I failed this time because of this one reason, when in truly failure happens because of multiple reasons. And so if we tend to embrace failure and we see it as growth, what we tend to do is say, well, I failed because of this one reason, and then we proceed into the next phase. And as we go to the next phase, we ignored the reason we failed, reasons 2 through 5. And so now the next time we fail, it'll be because of number 2, not 1. And then we fail again because of 3, and then so on. And that's why he was talking about the idea of not embracing failure, but truly seeing as a tragedy, using it as a motivator while focusing on the future as a destination.
Yeah, I remember, I've always sort of thought of that way too, where failure, it's not a situation, it's a culmination of everything.
You gotta say that again, brother. Say that shit again, but nice and loud so it's crisp. That's a Leoism you can add to it.
It's not a situation, it's a culmination of various thoughts that have led to that point in time. And to know that, then what you want to do is sort of a post-mortem. You want to autopsy the failure and find out where was the sick part, the weak part.
What's the 1 through 5?
Exactly.
Not just the 1.
No, but now the future, if you have a vision of what you want the future to look like, then put the 2 side by side. So what was it about the failure that made that not possible? And by dissecting it down to the components that you used in thoughts to get to that point in time, you become more aware. And again, that's what I mean by with,
in a sense, though, that argues against him.
Change. Yeah.
That argues against him, that truly then the failure becomes valuable.
I don't think anything we do is invaluable.
Mm.
Because, I mean, everything we do has a result. And a result is either something we can learn from, or something we are encouraged by.
Sure.
So, I mean, the only way it would be of no use is if we forgot it ever existed. And that's why history has a tendency to repeat itself.
Because we forget it happened.
Yeah, so we just, move on.
So that would also speak, though, to the importance of failure, is the history of the failure.
Absolutely.
And so it does have its importance, but I think I have to agree with him to the point that we shouldn't romanticize the failure. You can find a million YouTube videos where they say, fail forward. I'm going to agree with that, and that's where it changed my view of that podcast.
Well,
is the idea that we shouldn't romanticize the failure, but we should dissect the failure.
Yeah.
And I'm shitting all over myself.
Yeah, you're shitting on yourself.
But either way, the concept, though, that it does provide answers, and I like that, because, I'm looking at clients with substance abuse. If a relapse becomes, and I disagree that relapse is a part of sobriety, when you embrace that, you've already embraced failure.
Yeah.
And so relapse is not a part of sobriety.
Right.
If you've embraced relapse, you've already embraced the notion of failure.
Well, I mean, if you're going to look at...
But as long as when you fail, you're willing to dissect the failure, as you've stated,
right,
and work out why the failure occurred, not just one blame, the drug, or the craving, or the chemical imbalance, or the poor medication. We can't singular the failure. As long as we're willing to dissect the failure to make sure we failed 1 through 5 and possibly 6, 7, 8, and we grow from that failure, then embrace the failure. But don't embrace the notion that relapse comes with sobriety, because you've already embraced failure, in my term.
Well, I mean, if you understand failure to be a concept that you're using to define yourself, then it's very destructive.
That's the performance valuing again.
Yeah. But if I understand I did not do what I intended to do as a result of this, or I'm not satisfied with what happened, or I feel negative about the choices I've made, if you're already looking at that way, you're no longer in that failure. You're observing it. You become the observer, not the participant anymore. And by having that third-party perspective, you're giving yourself a chance for that objectivity. And so I'm looking at it with truth, not emotion.
Oh, come on. Now, I love that, because what I've been stating earlier a lot, actually, is, when I'm talking to clients about their thought process, and how that follows, and I always link it to racing thoughts, or the notion where your mind is racing, you can't shut it off. And I talk about, embrace the racing thought, but learn to become an observer of the thoughts rather than a reactor to the thoughts.
Right.
And so as long as you can observe the thoughts that are processing, we can play with them for a little bit and then decide whether or not, like you say, we let it flow through us or flow around us.
Right.
And so, and that's the notion. And I think people are so much more inclined to react to the emotion and not the truth, and that they feel the emotion, they have the thought, I should say, which creates the emotion, thus react to the emotion of the thought and behave.
Yeah, it's like a chain reaction.
Right.
But like you said, if you observe it and not react to the emotion associated with it, the minute you're in the observation mode, you're in the truth mode. Okay.
So are you saying that there's truth in observation?
Well, without observation.
In self-observation, maybe.
Well, I mean, with self-awareness.
Ah.
Okay. So if I'm aware of why I was feeling that way and understand the etiology of where it all came from, then I know how to respond. So a response is a result of objectivity, allowing yourself to know your truth as it relates to that event, and then respond compatible with your truth, where before I was trying to justify an emotion. Okay, now you're moving out into an area where you broke through that wall, and now growth takes place.
Ooh. And that's why I speak to the importance of developing that personalized philosophy. Because when you have that developed, when that moment occurs, you don't respond to the pros and cons and the emotion of the response to the decision that needs to be made.
Exactly.
By using the philosophy, you respond to the truth of you,
right?
Thus eliminating that guilt.
Yeah, and again, the growth also takes your truth with you and expands it. because the truth is not stagnant. It's not passive. It's a living organism that continues to grow based on the observations and your organization of what has happened and the historical components that define you. And by having that, you can't go back to being who you were, because you'd have to unlearn everything you know. And 2 minutes from now, you knew more than you knew before. 2 seconds from now. So it's an ongoing, very dynamic process that needs to be oftentimes observed, because it's sort of a living organism. If I'm not monitoring it, in other words, if I take it off the leash, who knows where this thing's going to go? And that's when the emotion, we go off that path, and those emotions, by the time we get back on the main road, we have screwed up big time.
Man.
So we got to keep it on that main path, that main road, by observation, because the truth is what keeps it centered and moving in a direction in a future that's compatible with where we want it to go. And that's what I mean by the whole idea of don't think of the goal, think of a direction.
Right.
The direction is maintained by a vision of where I want it to go based on my truth. That keeps me on the main road. But as I'm moving on that road, I am constantly barraged with more information, which is redefining my truth. But if I take my eye off the prize, in other words, now all of a sudden, since we all tend to be like somewhat emotionally ADD, now we're looking at things because that guy just, called me an asshole. Now all of a sudden, I'm focusing on that. Guess what? I just ran off the road. Okay, now I'm reacting, and I'm no longer responding to my truth. That's where the pause, whoa, now that takes me back to the main road, now I proceed.
We pause, we visit the personal life philosophy, we make the decision without emotion based on truth.
And the personal life philosophy is your truth.
Is the truth.
That's the essence. That's forever evolving. And so it's not like, well, I thought
how
this
you
way
talked
before.
about that, man. When the truth is not stagnant. And that's legit. I love how you went there.
Yeah.
We believe the truth to be this stone creation of immovable truth of object.
Yes.
And the way you stated that was, beautiful. It speaks to that notion of truth. It was. You hit the flow state, as they say, brother. You went off. The most when I talk about that is the roller coaster. It's like you ride a roller coaster and get off, tell me it's the scariest thing you ever rode. I ride it and get off and said I wasn't shit. Who's telling the truth?
Right.
The truth is vague, and that speech to it is real.
And it's developmental. Your truth when you were 10 is not the truth that you had at 20 or 50 or whatever.
Right.
Because that's where the idea of failure is all part of that matrix or that mural that represents your life. Without those understandings of where I've been, how do I know where I'm going, kind of thinking. But every time I have an experience, good, bad, and different, it continues to push you forward. Now, if you get stuck, okay, and I keep making the same choices with the same way of thinking, and the same choices with the same way of thinking, like that broken record over and over again, that's where you have to reboot. Okay, that's where it's like, okay, somewhere along the line, I was trying to justify with my belief system something that I couldn't reconcile, because it doesn't fit my belief system. Well, instead of trying to reconcile it, understand it. Why am I even here in the first place?
The why.
Yeah.
That why. When I'm talking to clients, it's funny that how people forget. They forget to ask that simple question, why. And when I talk about the transitions people get in, the beginning of those transitions, I tell them that they're in a state of master of self-criticism. And we get in these listing states where we can go down why my environment sucks, why the people suck, why I suck. We get listing, of why I fail. I fail because of da. And we have to begin to move to that analyzing, that observing. What am I thinking? Why am I thinking that? Rather than the thought, feeling, move. It's almost brain dead.
Well, it's like a single cell organism, and we're way more than that.
Right, we're so far advanced then. There's a thought, here's a feeling, now I'm moving.
Right.
The fact that people can't push beyond that to a point, baffles me sometimes. And I was talking to my buddy Danny last night, and we were talking about this notion of impulse control, self-control, whether something is disease-driven or not. And he brought up a really cool metaphor. He said, and I even joked that I would use it on a client or something talking. And he said, when you're driving a car, as some people all do that happen to be, will use substance abuse, what stops you when you know you could get to the destination much faster, quicker, and with a lot more fun and risk, and get that adrenaline pump if I make it there at 120 miles an hour versus the 40 mile an hour speed limit? What stops you from just gunning it and going and risking behavior, etc.? What stops you there versus what stops you from going, here's the drug I want to do of my choice? And I find it funny that they call it a drug of choice. And
it's more preference.
I know, but I just thought it was a really cool metaphor. When you even think about it from impulse control, when you even look at it from taking emotion versus truth, and that we may have that emotion to want to gun it and floor it and get there at 120, but the truth keeps us from gunning that gas pedal.
And why we gun it is to outdistance ourselves from the truth.
So we correlate gunning the gas pedal emotionally, like we do, because it's emotional when they're like,
if I do this fast enough, my truth can't yank me back before I get it.
And so that speaks to the first emotional thought that wants you to gun it, or the emotional thought that tells you to fight it, yell at it, whatever, cry about it, run away from it. And that's funny. And so we gun the emotional thinking.
And get as far as we can get before the truth catches us.
Because we know we should feel this way based on what happened.
Yeah. So
we are a fucked up species, mentally, my brother.
Well, but then
again, such a beautiful species.
But that's where the awareness part is. Like, once we understand what our genetics and all those things that go back in our DNA, what it set us up for. Once you understand that, it wants to go 120. Okay, I mean, it wants it now. We're all basically here.
And I think that's the society's norms of today. It didn't used to be.
Well, that's why we have so many laws, and that's why religion holds us in place, and all these things. That's the governor that we put on our mind. So we can't go above a certain RPM.
They were talking about on Joe Rogan Experience today or yesterday. This notion, right? How we have this concept in mental health, groupthink. Right. But they correlated this back and linked it to evolution and primal evolution development. Was in order to survive, you had to link to a group, and if you didn't link to a group, you might not make it, especially a strong group, villages, tribes, etc. So you would have to, even the human species itself had to become a group to survive. Based on fighting off animals and weather even, etc. So for survival, we have this notion inside of us to want to belong and want to be a part of a group. But that notion itself in today's society, I think, is what has began to create or seeded those notions of racism, those notions of classism, of separation.
If you understand, though,
because you want to be part of the stronger group.
Well, it's all based on fear. Okay?
I link it all to fear. I'm with you.
It's all to fear. It's like the reason, in my understanding.
Because you'd have been eaten, the other tribe would have taken you off.
And right under fear is hurt. In other words.
And that includes physical, painful hurt.
That includes annihilation. When I cease to exist, so I have to react. In other words, it's more like I have to do unto others before they do me first.
Right.
Okay.
But that was survival.
Yeah.
Then and seemingly now.
It's still something that we get caught up in.
We're such a young species, though.
But the whole thing of prejudice. It's basically a fear of because I don't understand what that other culture or whatever that person is like. It's a threat to my own understanding of myself.
Right.
And so it's easier to demonize that other person or to dislike them because either their way of doing things is right or my way is. And I'm not about to admit I'm wrong.
I'm not going to challenge my beliefs.
Exactly. So everyone comes from a position where they're trying to preserve their own integrities, both culturally and spiritually and even physically, by being right. And right then becomes their truth.
Right.
And if you don't support my truth, then you're threatening my existence. And if you threaten my existence, then those primal things start to come out.
Anger. Where
I need to push them away as far as possible because they have the potential of hurting me. Yeah. And that's, but what's also beautiful about humanity is you can understand that if you take the time to pause, know what the hell is going on.
Have a life philosophy you lead by.
If not, you're going right back to those primal instincts of reacting. And so, we're, like I said before, we're all basically hedonists. I mean, if it tastes good, if it feels good, if it looks good, we want more of it.
That's true.
But there's certain parts of us that have taught us that certain things that look good or taste good are not good for us. In fact, they can kill us. So we're always assessing. But if we don't take the time to do it,
to ourselves and our own thought.
Yes. And so we're reaching out for that drug or whatever because it's going to give us that feeling. And that's so primal to have that. But our truth down here doesn't support it. It's not something that's not something we're supposed to do. That's the whole point about to change what you do, you have to first change what you believe. Mm-hmm. I got to believe that this doesn't deprive me. I have to know, though, it does. I mean, if I say, well, I'm upset and this will make me feel better, then I have to have that. But to change it is like, I'm not depriving myself of this drug's depriving me of things I value way more.
Right.
But if I don't stop and think about it, I'm reacting to that primal need.
And I do want to clarify something. We're talking about this notion of drugs. And just briefly, we're running out of time, actually. The show's going to end up. But the notion of drugs itself is a term I don't like, and I know you don't like. The term drugs is too broad. It's like saying I like sports, and there's curling and rugby.
Well,
when we mention drugs, I'm just clarifying for the audience.
That's important to explain.
Right, and I know, and we know that when you and I talk, it's something we don't have to explain.
Right.
So I'm explaining to the audience that notion of drugs. When we say drugs, we lean toward the drugs that, and I'm not even going to venture to say that drugs are bad to a point of medicine, healing, etc. Because when we say drugs, that includes cancer patient drugs, that includes penicillin, that includes things, antibiotics.
How I separate them is there's a difference between drugs and a medication.
Right, drugs and medication are different.
Drugs treat the symptom, and medications are designed to eliminate the problem.
There you go.
But if you overuse...
I think you should reiterate that for the audience too that's listening.
I mean, truly then, if you understand drugs treat symptoms, medications are designed to eliminate the problem. But you have to be aware, if I abuse the medication, it becomes a drug. So that's where you have to take as prescribed and actually follow the guidance of someone who understands the medicinal aspect of that medication.
Be that natural, like something like ayahuasca, and a shaman can guide you through those methods of application, or be that a synthetic drug, prescribed from a...
It could be homeopathy, whatever it is, but, anything we abuse usually doesn't turn out too well.
Right, anything.
So, but yeah, that separation is important. If you're taking medication and it's correcting that biochemical aspect to get you back to being your own baseline, you can't think yourself back to 120/80, if you have high blood pressure.
Right.
So, so to know that's why I used it, much the same as our theory is, there's the physical aspect of who we are, there's the environmental aspect, and then there's the cognitive, how we think.
Right, the thinking, the environmental, yeah.
Right, so absolutely important point.
Yeah, so
thanks. I got to run.
Oh. So. You're already just out like that.
I think we're about running over anyway.
Yeah, it'll start.
I appreciate it. Good talk. Catch you later.
Brother. I'll see you in a second. Yeah, don't leave yet, though.
All right.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining me and Leo on the Cognitive Rampage. I have extreme amount of emails to return. So if I got some tonight or yesterday, I'm trying to work on it and get there. I'm not ignoring you at all. Just give me some time. Again, sorry we missed last week. We look forward to starting the new show. We'll be on the podcast again by the end of the month. I'll announce the date when I'm doing, where I'm doing it, when I'm doing the Cognitive Rampage live. I'll be giving a big seminar, but a lot we talked about, a lot was discussed here tonight. Some deeper things, marinate on those things, think about them for a while. But again, I appreciate you joining me. We'll be on Fridays at 7 o'clock as of right now, airing live. But we're kind of moving places around the office as we remodel and rebuild. Anyway, keep tuning in. Send the emails. Keep them coming. I promise I'll get there. And nothing else I don't think to inform you about. Let me see. You know what? I'm going to leave you with a cool fun fact that I learned today that I thought was pretty neat. And I'm going to butcher it. And I learned it from the Joe Rogan Experience. It's a podcast that if you're not listening to, I think you're probably getting dumber. So I would urge you to listen to the Joe Rogan Experience. I would urge you to listen to the Tim Ferriss Show, and a bunch of other podcasts I reference all the time. But what they discovered at some point, I told you again, I'm not a scientist, so I'll butcher this, but it's kind of fun. I'll give you two fun facts, actually. One that I learned on Joe Rogan Experience. Apparently, they discovered that they used to believe that oceans made up 98% of the water on Earth's planet. And since they've now made a discovery which has dropped that the oceans now make up about 25% of the Earth's water. And there's a mineral that they discovered under the Earth's mantle. The name of it I can't tell you. But apparently there's condensed water inside this material, or in this mineral. And this condensed water now is believed to hold the other percentage, the, 60-something or the 57-something percent of Earth's water now. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Blew my mind hearing it today, so that's cool. Fun fact to share. And a second one, just to throw another curveball at you, is that the Earth's population is actually decreasing, and I believed it to be increasing. And essentially, there is some term that I can't remember that each country per se or continent should have to have birth rates at to maintain the population. And essentially, just about every major country or continent is below that line. So, interesting. Marinate on that thought for a little bit. For me, it seems like we seem to be self-correcting because we know some things are happening. But two cool, interesting facts to leave you with. Again, appreciate you joining me tonight on the Cognitive Rampage. We'll see you next week, Friday at 7. See you then.